As a fan of the Castlevania games from the handheld era such as the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS, I was quite surprised and excited by the release of Castlevania Dominus Collection, I guess that's how you pronounce it. It was dropping on the same day as the Nintendo Direct that showcased it, which was pretty awesome, and I previously reviewed the previous collection, the Advance Collection, and that review did quite well in terms of views for my channel, which makes me happy, so thank you to those who saw that review, and hopefully you return for this one. Now, I did get the game on PlayStation instead of Nintendo Switch, since I no longer have my Switch. That's a story for another time, but I did have more experience with the Game Boy Advance games from the previous collection, and not so much here. I didn't really play any of these games back in the day, with the exception of Portrait of Ruin, which we will get to. Now, I do want to start this review by talking about Dawn of Sorrow, which is basically the sequel to the Game Boy Advance's Aria of Sorrow game. I don't have a ton of experience with the game before this collection released, only dipping my toes in from emulators that I tried. Not saying that the game is bad and it couldn't just keep me engaged and entertained, I just have a hard time sticking with emulators for some weird reason. Maybe it's the lack of my ease of use with emulators. It's not very accessible for me, if that makes sense. Now, here in Dawn of Sorrow, you do play as Soma Cruz, who is met with a cult attempting to bring back Dracula and possibly using his body as a vessel for Dracula to once again be revived. And when that time comes, this game, unlike most Castlevania games, does take place in the future rather than the past, somewhere around the early 2030s. And just like its predecessor, Aria of Sorrow, this game is also kind of a starting point of a new type of Castlevania. Your character is not a member of the famous Belmont family and doesn't use the legendary whip, the Vampire Killer. Instead, you can find and equip tons of different weapons such as axes, swords, maces, hammers, etc. In addition, you also have a kind of soul system here. Basically, by defeating enemies and bosses, they can drop a soul that will provide different abilities when you have them equipped. There are 3 different types of souls that you can equip at a time. Ones that would do something like an additional attack based on the enemy that you have a soul of, like a spinning spear attack. There are souls that will boost different attributes like luck or defense, for example. And then you have souls that could either summon a familiar to fight alongside you, or even provide some new different movement abilities like slowing down your fall when you jump, which will help you reach some hard to reach places, just to name a few of them. You do also unlock the ability to create 2 different sets of your equipped souls, and you can switch between them at any point by pressing a button, basically saving 2 different sets of 3 souls that will give you different play styles and different attributes and different techniques that you can switch back and forth whenever you want. Dawn of Sorrow also has a magic seal system, if you will, which is used to open some doors and defeating bosses. On the original DS, you would use the touchscreen to draw the symbol that will display on the screen when it pops up. If you play this game on Nintendo Switch, apparently in handheld, you do have the option to use the touchscreen to do that. But if you're playing the game docked on your Nintendo Switch, or you're playing on PlayStation like I did, you would have to use the right trigger and the right stick to draw the symbols that come up on screen. On the PlayStation, you do also have the option to use the touchpad to draw the symbols as well. However, when you do use the right stick and the right trigger to draw these symbols, it feels very clunky and very sloppy, and it had caused me to fail the seal drawing over and over again, having to redo it just because of those failures. Normally this would be a reduction in points for the review, but the game does offer a quick time event option where you can press the buttons that pop up on the seal rather than having to draw the seal with the right stick and the right trigger. I have no idea how I activated that option, but I am glad that it is there, and I can use that to make this part of the game much less of a hassle. That's pretty much the only game in the collection that uses this type of seal ability. And with that, we're going to go into the next game in this collection in chronological order, which is Portrait of Ruin. Now, this is one that I actually did play as a kid. I remember after graduating from 8th grade and getting ready for high school in the summer, I begged my mom to buy me this game, and from my memory, I felt that Portrait of Ruin was a fairly short game for a Castlevania game. Maybe I just breezed through it back in the day, maybe it really is that short. That's just what I remember, but this game is actually quite different from what you might be used to in Castlevania, as with the other two in this collection. But this one specifically providing two playable characters simultaneously and has a larger focus on teamwork rather than giving you just one character. Here you have Jonathan Morris as your primary protagonist, who was actually related to the Belmont family and does have possession of that returning legendary whip, the Vampire Killer. However, due to his father unable to teach him how to fully access the power of the whip before his untimely death, Jonathan does struggle to wield its legendary power and also struggles to deal with the topic of his father. This inability to wield the power of the whip is not only for story purposes, it also plays a huge role in the game that I will not spoil here. Now, Jonathan is joined by his mage counterpart Charlotte, and these two characters do have some of their differences in terms of the types of attacks they can use, Jonathan being the stronger character, whereas Charlotte would be more for support and might have a bit more options for range combat. And you can freely switch between the two characters at will, and you can even summon your partner to travel and fight alongside you, which there's really no reason why you wouldn't. Now, luckily, anytime you have a companion with you and they take damage, they are actually losing part of your mana bar and not your health. So you don't have to worry about your partner taking damage and then dying, and in turn, you dying with them. It's just the mana that will lose some meter, and then you just have to wait for it to refill before you can summon your partner again, and that's pretty awesome. Now, you can also give your partner some basic commands, such as having them stay in place to help you solve some puzzles, and you can also learn some teammate, specials that will either be used in combat to deal massive damage at the cost of a lot of your mana bar, or you can do something like having your teammate stand there to be used so you can basically bounce off their shoulders to gain extra height until you unlock the double jump, that is. You can also use a dialogue feature in the menu to have Charlotte and Jonathan have a quick conversation about what's happening in the game, and it just added a bit more personality to this game, which is pretty awesome. There are also some cool details in the game, like having Charlotte in front of a certain enemy, he won't attack her because he's fallen in love with her, and that's just pretty cool detail that they added to the game. Now, as the title suggests, in Portrait of Ruin, your heroes will find various paintings that have dark magic, and you can actually enter these paintings, kind of like Blue's Clues if you remember that show, and it would then take you to a brand new location, a brand new level with new enemies to battle, as well as a new boss battle at the end, which upon defeating that boss will help to reduce the dark magic around the castle, which is kind of your main goal in this game. Definitely a very interesting mechanic for sure with the Castlevania franchise. Some of these levels are actually really good, really detailed, and really interesting to travel to, so it is a pretty fun thing to do with this game. And as I mentioned, teamwork is a big part of Portrait of Ruin, and is not only just for your characters that you play as, but there is also some teamwork aspect within some of the boss fights, and I won't spoil it here, but you are definitely in for a treat if you try this game. Now, finally, the last game in this kind of trilogy, if you will, is Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, and this is one that I'd never played before until now. In this one, you play as Shanoa, I believe is how you pronounce her name. She is a member of the Order of Ecclesia, a secret organization dedicated to stopping Dracula from using his powers and resurrecting, and you basically do that with the power of, I believe it's Dominus is what they use. In this game, Shanoa is chosen to take on the power of Dominus, and she is then betrayed by her colleague Albus, who wanted the power for himself because he was originally promised that power. By disrupting the ritual, the Dominus ritual, it did cause Shanoa to lose her memory, and she now has a task to find Albus and take the power back, and then bring him back to the Order of Ecclesia, all while eventually, of course, going to stop Dracula from his inevitable return. Now, this game is quite different for quite a few reasons compared to all the other Castlevania games, and one of them is actually what I believe is the first time in the series where we have a female playable protagonist, with the exception of Portrait of Ruin, of course, but that one gives you two characters instead of one, whereas here you only get the one main female protagonist. And in terms of playing as Maria from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, I believe that was more of a secret unlock or a cheat code to use, so it doesn't really count there. Order of Ecclesia also has you travel to different areas like a small town, a forest, a prison, and other locations that are not in Dracula's castle, so that is also very different here as well. You do also lose the option to use a standard attack like all the previous games. No vampire whip, no weapons that you would have equipped to do a normal attack. Instead, you have something called glyphs. Now, glyphs are earned by defeating different enemies or finding them throughout the maps, and it's kind of similar to the soul system in Dawn of Sorrow, whereas these glyphs will give you some new ability, but they are mostly weapons, and you are able to equip 2 different glyphs at the same time, or 2 of the same glyphs at the same time simultaneously. This will also allow you to have the option to do a basic combo by switching between your 2 buttons. So on PlayStation, it'll be square and triangle. Switching them back and forth simultaneously would do a combo attack based on what weapons that you have equipped with the glyph system. I know, sounds a little bit complicated, right? Now, unfortunately, with the combat system, it does drain your mana meter pretty quickly because you are using the glyphs for your attacks rather than equipping a regular weapon. And you actually cannot attack when your mana meter is empty, and you have to wait until it fills up for you to attack again. Usually that would be points deducted from the review, but luckily the mana will recharge almost instantly when it's drained, and that helps keep the game from losing points in the review. This game, I can tell, was definitely at the end of the DS era because you can see based on this game compared to the other 2, there's a bit more of an improvement with the graphics and the performance, and I really wonder what could have been if they even pushed it even further for another game on the DS, or if we got something better than what was given on the 3DS. That's a story for another time though. Throughout all the games, you will see pretty much the same type of enemies with any Castlevania game, your typical skeletons, your axe armors, etc, but these 3 games will also have some enemies that are kind of exclusive to their games themselves that you may not see in other games. And with Order of Ecclesia, as I mentioned, the game being a bit more graphically impressive than the other 2, you will also see some enemies that are very creepy looking and a bit more detailed than the other games, so you do have that going for it as well. Now, to compromise for the lack of a dual screen for these games, since they were on the Nintendo Switch, you do have on your screen your main display on the left side of your screen. That's where you see your characters and the game where you're controlling. On the right, however, is where you have your map, your status menu. You have a little section that shows you the enemy you just battled with, that kind of thing. You do have options to change the layout of the screens, whether you want it side by side, one on top of the other one, if you want to change the size of each screen for a better visual, and you can also change the theme of these screen displays, which is pretty cool. Now, this collection, just like the previous one, does also offer the ability to rewind at any point. So if you died and you don't want to restart from the save point, or you missed a jump and want to try it again, you can just hold the left shoulder button and retry again and again and again. You do also have the option to create a save state at any point in the game and load that save state as well. So no needing to go to a save room, especially if you're maybe playing on the Switch and you have to turn it off and go, or if you're playing on the PlayStation Portal like I've been trying. So that's also a really good feature here. There's also a art gallery and a music gallery, and you can even make a playlist of your favorite songs from these games in the music gallery, and that's pretty cool. On top of that, they also decided to add 2 bonus games to this collection, one of which is an arcade classic called Haunted Castle, and they also have what's called Haunted Castle Revisited, which I guess is like a remastered, if you will. Now, the former being a really traditional classic Castlevania style game with really clunky, sluggish movement and high difficulty, and it was pretty hard, and I just wasn't interested in that type of game. But the revisited version does play a bit more like that original Haunted Castle, but with much more better visuals and graphics, and it does move a bit better, a bit more smooth, and is not as clunky, and I don't think it's as challenging either. And the visual upgrade is pretty nice. There really isn't much to be said about these 2 arcade classic games, but they are there if you want them, and it was a nice addition for us that Konami gave. Now, this collection will cost you only $25, and if you're a fan of the handheld Castlevania games or even Metrovania games in general, you're going to love this collection, especially with that $25 price tag. It is well worth your money, has a lot of content, a lot of features. Even the games themselves do have various secrets for replay, playing the game a second time with a different character. I won't spoil that for you here, but I believe all 3 games do have that option to play as different characters, and that's pretty awesome. So you're basically getting 5 games with 3 of them having a option to play the game maybe 2 or 3 more times as well. I do believe this is well worth a try, and hopefully Konami continues to do good as they proceed forward and leave all of their mistakes in the past. So that's my review of the Castlevania Dominus collection, whatever it's called. So thank you guys for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.